So welcome, Beverly. I'm so excited to introduce you. Beverly's talk today is entitled Codependency, Why Others Are Sometimes So Much More Important Than Ourselves. Beverly Conyers, MA, one of the most respected voices in wellness and recovery, has guided tens of thousands of people through the process of recognizing family roles in addiction, healing shame, building healthy relationships, releasing trauma, focusing on emotional sobriety, as well as acknowledging self-sabotaging behaviors, addictive tendencies, and substance use patterns. With her newest work, Conyers shows us how the practice of mindfulness can be a game-changing part of recovering from any and everything. A guided introduction to mindfulness practice as a path to recovering health and sanity, even in unpredictable times. Beverly is an editor and freelance writer who lives in beautiful New England and is the author of Addict in the Family, Stories of Loss, Hope, and Recovery, Everything Changes, Help for Families of Newly Recovering Addicts, and The Recovering Heart, Emotional Sobriety for Women. I'm so delighted to have you here. I'm going to unspotlight myself and I'm going to sit back, and I look forward to listening and learning from you today, Beverly. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. And I really want to thank everyone who's joining us today for what I hope will be an informative and helpful discussion of codependence. Codependence is a relationship style that many of you are probably familiar with, as am I. When I was 18 years old, I met the love of my life. I'm going to start by discussing my own experience with codependence, which I got involved with when I was 18 years old. I met the love of my life. He was my soulmate, the one person in the whole world who was meant for me. His birthday happened to be 6 months to the day before mine, which I took as a sign that fate meant us to be together. And he agreed. I immediately dropped out of college and he quit his job because if you're soulmates, you want to spend every possible minute together. Of course, we found out that even soulmates need money, so we ended up getting part-time jobs and making sure that our schedules matched. Sometimes I would cry when we went to work because we'd be apart for a little while. I would panic if he came home late. So as you can imagine, our relationship was pretty intense. And if it sometimes felt a little bit smothering, I ignored those feelings because after all, having a soulmate meant that I never had to be lonely or incomplete or empty again. I was part of him and that made me whole, or so I believed. Fast forward 22 years or so and our relationship imploded spectacularly. I won't go into details, but suffice it to say there was a lot of drinking, fighting, a lot of blaming and regrets. And when it was over, I discovered that I didn't have a clue about how to live as an independent adult. I was as emotionally damaged and lost as I'd been as a teenager, but now I had a lot of extra baggage. The problem was I'd lived my entire adult life in a codependent relationship, which meant that my personal identity was wrapped up in someone else. Without him, I didn't know who I was. A lot of people are in relationships like that. Maybe you're one of them, or you know someone who is. The thing is, it's easy to fall into a codependent relationship without even knowing it. And once we're in it, it can start to seem natural, like there's no other way to be in a relationship unless you're all tangled up in each other. We can come to believe there are no alternatives, but there are. With awareness, patience, and practice, we can recover from codependence. We can learn how to create healthier relationships and build a more sustainable, authentic sense of self. With those goals in mind, we're going to explore 4 important aspects of codependence today. First, what is codependence? How do we define it? Second, how does codependence develop and why does it matter? Third, Why are substance use and codependence often intertwined? And finally, how can we recover from codependence and create better relationships and a more authentic sense of self? So let's begin by clarifying what we mean by the term codependence. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot. And like a lot of words that are out there in the universe, people have different ideas about what it actually is. One thing worth mentioning is that codependence has never been formally recognized as a clinical diagnosis or a personality disorder, and you won't find it listed in any handbook of mental illness. Instead, it's a type of dysfunctional relationship that can be defined in various ways. Here are a few of my favorites. This first is from Wikipedia. High self-sacrifice, focus on others' needs, suppression of one's own emotions, and attempts to control or fix other people's problems. The next definition is from Melody Beattie, who wrote the book on codependence. And she said simply, codependence is obsessing about controlling another person's behavior. And this last definition is from Charles Whitfield, who wrote Healing the Child Within. He said codependence is a disease of lost selfhood. A disease of lost selfhood. Now, each of these definitions offers a somewhat different spin on what codependence is all about, but they have something important in common. And that's the idea that codependence is being so attached to something or someone outside ourselves that we lose touch with our own inner self. At its core, codependence is the loss of our individual identity. So how does this happen and why does it matter? Let's look at the first question first. Codependence is rooted in some very natural, very powerful human needs. Even when the codependent relationship is terrible, stifling, destructive, even abusive, something about it is compelling. It fulfills an inner need. But what is that need? What need could codependence possibly satisfy? Well, take your pick. The need for love, the need for connection, the need to not be lonely, the need to be needed, the need for purpose, the need for identity, the need for security, the need for approval, the need to escape from pain. The list goes on. These are all powerful, legitimate human needs. And they're especially powerful if we didn't receive the care, nurturing, and security we needed during our childhood, or if we experienced childhood trauma. Many things can cause trauma, but what's important to know is that we don't have to face death or physical injury to be traumatized. Trauma can be caused by any event that makes us feel overwhelmed, frightened, and helpless. And because we are at our most helpless as children, we are more vulnerable to trauma during our formative years. Childhood trauma can have a severe and long-lasting impact on the way we function in the world. We tend to blame ourselves when we're children. We blame ourselves for bad things that happen to us. If our home life is chaotic, we feel responsible. If we aren't loved, or if we're neglected, bullied, harshly criticized, or abused, we believe it's our fault. This burden of self-blame can lead to feelings of worthlessness and shame, to the secret fear that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. In my own personal experience, I came to understand that I was irresistibly drawn to my soulmate because I was starved for love. I'd had a traumatic and lonely childhood, and at my core, I felt lost and worthless. He was a tailor-made blend of passion, control, and neediness. the perfect answer to all my problems, just as my own particular insecurities were the perfect answer to his. The trouble was, despite the intensity of our relationship, it didn't fix anything. The mental, emotional, and spiritual problems we brought into the relationship just got worse and worse. Because in many ways, codependence functions like addiction. It not only masks our problems, it intensifies them. Look at it this way. None of us comes into the world knowing who we are. Instead, we build our sense of self through a long process of trial and error, testing our strengths and weaknesses, discovering our likes and dislikes, exploring our dreams and fears, and doing the hard, incredibly difficult task of moving from pain to healing. But addiction short circuits that process. It numbs the thoughts, feelings, and insights that can lead us to who we are. Addiction shuts the door on self-discovery. Now, why does this matter? Why is self-discovery so important? Quite simply, we must know who we are in order to make the life choices that bring us happiness. Self-knowledge means that we know what our values are, we know what's important to us, what we want to spend our time doing, and how we want other people to treat us. Self-knowledge gives us a core. It's both the anchor that keeps us grounded during life's inevitable storms and the wings that lift us to our highest aspirations. Without self-knowledge, we spend our life in confusion, looking for something without ever knowing what it is. It's important to note here that there's no endpoint to self-knowledge. There's no completion date. Every new experience has the potential to teach us something new about ourselves, just as every challenge, disappointment, failure, or success is an opportunity to learn and grow. Self-discovery is a lifelong journey, unless something like addiction interrupts it. There's a truism in recovery circles that we stop growing when addiction takes hold. As the writer Carolyn Knapp put it when she was describing her own struggle with alcoholism, she said, "The drink stunts you. It prevents you from walking through the kinds of fearful life experiences that bring you from point A to point B on the maturity scale." Codependence has the same effect. It stunts you. When our attention is constantly focused on fixing or controlling or rescuing or hanging on to someone else, we never deal with the fundamental task of figuring out who we really are. We have the same experiences over and over again, and we never heal from the pain of our past. So as we've seen, codependent relationships often start out in response to powerful human needs, but they end up functioning in a way that's similar to other addictions. In fact, the co-founder of the National Association for Children of Alcoholics offered this definition of codependence. She said, "It is a brain disorder that leads codependent people, that leads codependents to seek the relief of soothing brain chemicals, which are released through compulsive behaviors, including addiction to work, substances, gambling, food, sex, and/or relationships." In other words, codependent relationships trigger the same brain chemicals that are triggered by addictive substances and behavioral addictions. When we're codependent, our mood, our sense of well-being, our ups and downs, our highs and lows, they're all determined by what's going on in the relationship. When things are good, our brain is flooded with feel-good chemicals. Even when things are bad, when we're arguing, fighting, engaged in all kinds of conflict, we get an adrenaline rush. But when nothing much is going on or when the relationship ends, we're apt to experience the anxiety and depression of withdrawal. As one woman described it, you get addicted to the relationship, to the drama. You feel empty without it. And this happens whether it's a relationship with a partner, a child, other family members, or friends. I discovered this truth when my youngest daughter became addicted to heroin. I'd spent years working on recovery from the destructive codependent relationship I'd had with her father. But I quickly fell back into codependence when I decided that it was my job to rescue her. I put all my energy into trying to save her, and my own life no longer seemed to matter. I lost interest in work, friends, even my other children. As I became obsessed with her problems, I was constantly thinking about her, constantly worrying, constantly trying to come up with ways to get her into rehab, to get her a job, to get her new friends, to get her arrested, whatever I thought might be the magic solution. And that situation lasted for years. But nothing much changed except that I got emotionally sicker and she got more resentful of me as her addiction continued. And here's where codependence gets a little bit murky, because when someone we love is suffering, it's natural to want to help. And when that loved one is facing a life-threatening disease, it's natural to worry and try to come up with solutions. Addiction kills. Every parent of an addict knows that. It's the scary reality we live with every day. So it's easy to become so obsessed with your child that you lose touch with yourself. But in 12-step meetings, we learn that you can't help anyone if you yourself aren't well. We learn about the dangers of enabling. We're taught the value of detaching with love and focusing on yourself. All of this was a struggle for me, as it is for many people. Because I think when someone you love is suffering, you need to show the compassion and empathy you feel. You need to be willing to show encouragement and support. That's part of any healthy, loving relationship. But caring and compassion tip over into codependence when you sacrifice yourself. Because no matter how much our loved one is struggling, it's still their struggle, their journey, just as it is our struggle and our journey to become the best version of ourselves we can be. When we sacrifice our own well-being in our attempts to rescue another, the person we're fixated on never gets to grow up, and we never get to feel whole. It took me a long time to figure out that codependence isn't love. It's just codependence. So far we've looked at what codependence is, what causes it, how it harms relationships and stifles self-knowledge, and how it's connected to addiction. In this final segment, we'll look at ways to recover from codependence so we can begin to create healthier relationships and develop a stronger sense of self. Here are 6 strategies that have been helpful for me. First, spend some quality time with yourself every day. You can't get to know yourself if you don't spend time with yourself. So put away your phone, unplug your devices, find a place where you can be alone, and give yourself a few minutes of quiet, uninterrupted time, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes or so. What you do with that time is up to you. You could spend it journaling, drawing, doing yoga, taking a walk, praying, or meditating. The point is to give yourself time to simply be without distractions. Second, pay attention to your thoughts and feelings without judgment. As codependent people, we're pretty good at ignoring our internal life. but our thoughts and feelings are authentic responses to what we're experiencing. If we ignore them, we can't learn from them. So check in with yourself at least once a day. What's going on in your heart and mind? What thoughts and feelings are coming up for you? Don't judge them as or label them as good or bad. Simply notice them. They're part of you. Maybe there's something to be learned from them, or maybe you can simply let them go. Third, nurture what you value. Take some time to figure out what you really value in this world, starting with your moral values. Our beliefs about right and wrong are fundamental to our sense of self. When we live in harmony with our moral values, we feel happier and more content. We feel better about ourselves. When we ignore our moral values, we create internal friction and confusion. Our moral values are there to guide us. But values are not limited to issues of morality. We value many things in this life, such as family, friends, security, education, beauty, adventure, personal talents and abilities. The clearer we are about what we value, what's important to us, the better able we are to devote time and energy to those things that truly give us satisfaction. Fourth, build boundaries, not walls. Boundaries are those physical and emotional limits we set to let other people know how to treat us. They're lines we won't allow others to cross, designed to protect our own well-being. They also limit the behaviors we'll accept from ourselves. When our values reflect our innermost needs, beliefs, and values, we become clear about what we will and won't do. In a very real sense, boundaries help us define and express who we really are. But those of us who are recovering from codependence can confuse boundaries with walls. I know I did that for a long time. We can become so frightened of losing ourselves in another codependent relationship that we won't let anybody get close to us. And that's okay. Healing from codependence can take a long time, but it's important to remember that all healthy relationships require some degree of interdependence, some degree of vulnerability and trust. We may have a long journey to get there, especially if we've been deeply damaged by a codependent relationship, but boundaries are most helpful when they're clear enough to protect us from manipulation and abuse, and flexible enough to allow for genuine connection with others. Fifth, practice self-compassion. Many of us who are codependent have a difficult past. We've experienced trauma and emotional pain, and our attempts to numb those feelings may have led us to make poor choices. We may have hurt ourselves and others, and we may secretly believe that we don't deserve happiness. But self-compassion can change our perspective. We can learn to accept the fact that we are human and that all humans make mistakes. As the writer Maya Angelou said, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Give yourself the same kindness and forgiveness you would give to a suffering friend or loved one. You, no less than anyone, are deserving of compassion. And finally, develop your spirituality. For many of us, spirituality means having a deeply personal connection with a higher power, however we define it. But in a broader sense, spirituality can mean a deep and personal connection with anything that's bigger than ourselves. Nature, art, music, literature, service to others. Anything that is a life-affirming pursuit. Spirituality is an awakening of the soul. It stirs a sense of appreciation, even a sense of awe for the mystery and grandness of life itself. By nurturing our connection to those things that give meaning and beauty to our lives, our spirit is free to grow and heal. So those are the strategies that I have found most useful in my ongoing recovery from codependence. Of course, recovery from anything doesn't happen overnight. Habits are hard to break, pain lingers, and deeply held fears and insecurities don't vanish simply because we want them to. Still, by becoming more aware of our feelings and learning to nurture what is good and true within us, we can begin to build healthier relationships, embrace the journey of self-discovery, and allow our authentic self to fully blossom.
I just want to talk a little bit about your books to remind people about them. And Carrie is going to share a link, I believe. Okay. Addict in the Family, Support Through Loss, Hope, and Recovery is one of them. Find Your Light, Practicing Mindfulness to Recover from Anything. The Recovering Heart, Emotional Sobriety for Women, one of the books that I keep very close by. And Everything Changes, Help for Families of Newly Recovering Addicts. Thank you so much, Beverly. Chris, I think you can stop sharing now. And I believe it should just be the two of us on the screen if the technology is working the way it's intended to. Thank you. That was fabulous. You know, I can't get enough, I don't think, information about codependency. I remember when I got into recovery from substance use disorder in the late 1980s and early in the 1990s, started looking at issues related to codependency when I was introduced to the work of, oh my gosh, why am I going to forget his name? Who's the fellow that talked about the inner child, started talking about the inner child?
Charles Whitfield?
No, it wasn't Charles Whitfield. It was older than Charles Whitfield. Oh my goodness. Okay. How incredible. Like, I know his name like my own dad's name, and now it's escaping me. No. It'll come to me. It'll come to me. But I remember being in recovery and thinking, okay, now I'm going to these recovery meetings. At the time, very involved in 12-step recovery early in my recovery, less so now because She Recovers takes up a lot of our life. Mm-hmm. But I still consider myself a member of a 12-step recovery program. And I remember at the time thinking that I go to this one over here, and now I have to go to ACOA, the Adult Children of Alcoholics, for my inner child stuff. And then I have to go over here to CODA. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking there's too many things that I have to do. And I at the time kind of wished that we could bring them all together, which eventually is kind of why She Recovers came to be. But my question for you is, for somebody who can recognize themselves in the descriptions that you're talking about, there are a lot of different options for where they can go to start to heal. And what's their first step?
The first step, I think, is being aware of your feelings, recognizing your feelings. I think for me anyway, I spent so many years denying that I was unhappy because I was with this person I was absolutely madly in love with, and I was so obsessed with him, and he was obsessed with me. So how could I be unhappy? And I remember a friend from high school got in touch with me after I hadn't spoken. You know, we'd been apart for many, many years, and she could hear right away in my voice that I wasn't happy. So it's almost like I needed someone else to tell me what I knew deep down, but I couldn't recognize it, because if I wasn't happy in this relationship that basically was my whole life, then what did I have? I didn't have anything. So I think just becoming aware of your feelings and acknowledging them, even if you're not ready to move on it, but just simply acknowledging that they're there.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important, right? And I love kind of what you said too, you know, it's acknowledging it, but then speak it out loud to somebody. You know, I remember that idea that, like, if you tell somebody what's going on in here, then they can kind of be a mirror for you and say, like, that's a little bit messed up. You know, you need to kind of look at that. And thank you, Chris Dietz. It was John Bradshaw. So it's John Bradshaw's work. And it was just all kind of all encompassing. And I guess, again, for me, what at different times in my life, I've needed to do the work by reading Pia Melody Beattie on codependency. I've had to look at different materials on love addiction, the adult child of alcohol, like all of those things. It was dysfunction in my family, not alcoholism so much, but and I just love that when I think about all of those various things in my life that I've chosen to work on and recover from, the codependency is kind of an umbrella over all of them. They're different manifestations. I mean, love addiction was, and it sounds like you and I have a lot in common in that regard, a really extreme kind of version of codependency, right?
Absolutely. And I think it comes from really a fear that you're not enough by yourself. Like, if I don't have this, then I'm nothing.
Yeah,
there's just
absolutely.
nothing there. And I remember when I was driving my daughter to her first rehab, and I said something to her like, why couldn't you just have a couple of beers? Why'd you have to go to heroin? And she said, I just feel so empty inside. And I think that's it, that sense that there's nothing there and we've got to fill it with something, whether it's a relationship or substances or something else.
Blessings on your daughter.
Thanks.
So there's a question from the Facebook group, and you may not know the answer to this because a lot of people don't know and they will not have heard of this. I have a little bit of information about it, so just let me know if it's something you want me to take. But the question is, what is the difference between codependence and prodependence?
Prodependence?
Prodependence.
Okay, so I've never heard that term, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I was introduced to it at a conference just a couple of years ago, and the author of the book on prodependence, his name is Rob Weiss, and he wrote a book called Practicing Prodependence. He calls it, the book is Beyond the Myth of Codependency. So he's actually critiquing the idea of codependency and the idea that to me, it's kind of set up as an alternative, but when you read his work and you listen to him, it's actually not that diverse. It's not as distinct or polarized from codependency as I first thought. What his argument is that rather than as a codependent person in a codependent relationship, specifically with people in substance use recovery, that rather than kind of remove yourself and take care of yourself, that you actually move into closer to the relationship and embrace and celebrate that you're a caregiver. It's really hard, I think, for those of us who have been for the last 30 years thinking the other way, but it's an interesting concept. I think you'd be interested to look into it, Beverly, a little bit. What I found when I read the book closely was that I remember thinking what it reminded me of was the difference between, as an adult, being in a codependent relationship with another adult who is using substances and being able to step back and say, you know what, like you have to do something about this, and I can't do it for you. I can't want it for you. I can't wish it for you. And then letting that adult make decisions about themselves. It was the difference between that and what happened when my daughter Taryn, who's the co-founder of She Recovers, did when she was 15, 16. And when she was really struggling with a very sudden onset of cocaine and meth addiction. And in my 12-step recovery community, and she's 15 years old, and I had people saying things to me like, you're just going to have to let her hit her bottom. You're just going to have to let her hit her. And I was just drawn, like these people had given me my life. I listened to them for years at that time. I was so confused, but I had a therapist who said, no, you're not going to let her hit her bottom. Her bottom will be death. The way she's using it, it's such a sudden onset and it's so quick and she's spiraling. And so it was, I think the difference, and I'd love you to speak to this a little bit. There's a difference, I think, between stepping in and engaging and caring for, and not rescuing, but supporting and loving a child who's struggling with substance use disorder, and how we deal with that same child once that child becomes an adult. Do you know what I'm asking? Like, I in my experience, there had to be a difference. I mean, I had to not let this girl hit her bottom. I had to intervene. I had to try and intervene, and she responded. So we were very fortunate at that time.
So I guess I'm not totally clear on what you're asking. the difference between the codependent relationship with my spouse and with my daughter? Is that?
No, I'm saying, like, is there a distinction to be made about if we are a person, like, is it that we're being codependent when we're trying to care for a young adult, like a teenager who's experiencing substance use disorder? Like, does that have to be called codependency? Can it not be called
No, and I
parenting?
think that's why I made a point to say that it's natural to want to care for people who are suffering. And if someone is suffering from something like addiction, which, as we know, can lead to death, then of course we want to step in and we want to do everything we can to help. But at the same time, we can't lose ourself to such an extent that we get caught up in the insanity of it, because then we're another crazy person trying to help this person who's caught up in the insanity of it. And we're both just off the rails. So we have to maintain our core of self, even when we're doing everything we can to help that struggling person.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe
Yeah,
that.
I
I
think
mean,
so
and I
too.
know parents, I know parents who did not who turned their child out, would not let them come home because they felt that was the right thing to do after many, many attempts to help their child find recovery. And it takes a lot of courage to take that step. It's a drastic step. It's not right for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even fathom it. So
Yeah.
it certainly would never have been the right step for me.
Yeah.
And I do think that we, in our society, we've definitely, and research has really moved a lot away from that really hard tact, right? I mean, not that there, and talk about the boundaries and setting boundaries and expectations, and then there being consequences. But I think that most experts agree now that the really drastic, tough love approach is really not something that we need to look at too closely in today's world. But that doesn't mean that we can't set boundaries and expectations and also level consequences. So thank you. I've got a ton of questions here, so I have to stop just asking mine. Here we go. Do you have any advice for a recovering mother? Sometimes it feels like my codependency is just a natural impulse to care and provide for my son.
So for a recovering mother, and the natural impulse is to care for her son.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for a recovering mother? So I don't know if she's meaning she's recovering from codependency. Sometimes it feels like my codependency is just a natural impulse to care and provide for my son.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we were just talking about. Like, you have a natural impulse to care and provide for, especially if it's a child. I mean, and you're the mother. That's what we do. So is it codependence? I think it's codependence if you're losing yourself, if you're not able to enjoy your life, if you're not able to do the things that give you satisfaction because your identity is so wrapped up in your son that you don't exist without this relationship. And I do think that codependence, even if they're motivated by caring, I think that they can be harmful, especially if we rush in to rescue someone instead of nurturing their ability to grow into independent people. So I don't think there's a blanket answer to any of this. I really don't. I think there's always shades and degrees, but I think caring for our child is natural, but taking care of ourselves has to be equally important.
I think that's a great way to kind of, there is that line in there, right? What was the definition? One of the definitions that you used really jumped out at me, and it was the loss of self. What was the self one? Lost selfhood.
Yes.
Like if you're experiencing lost selfhood in your caring for your child, then it's something worth looking at.
Absolutely. Because we have this life and we need to live our life to manifest who we are.
Yeah. Somebody's sharing, I just want to share that I deeply appreciate this presentation. I choose to live my life sober, but recovery from codependency has been a great challenge and perhaps the most important part of my recovery. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being here. We thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was hard for
Um,
me too, and I don't think you ever totally recover from anything, but you learn from it and move on. But I can honestly say I cried for years when my relationship with my ex ended.
oh,
It was
absolutely,
shattering.
absolutely.
It was shattering.
So another treasured member of our community is asking, how can you clarify the difference between codependence? I think we've maybe done this a little bit, and healthy caregiving for another. I think that's kind of the same question asked that was just asked,
I
and that
think
you've
it's one
answered that.
that we struggle with so much, especially if someone's struggling with addiction, because as we've said, addiction kills. We know that, and we can't just say, "Well, I'm going to just live my life and good luck." We do have to express the compassion and empathy we feel and be supportive. I remember a counselor I was who was so helpful to me. I saw her for several years until she retired, unfortunately, but one of the things that has stayed with me that she said was, the best thing you can do for an addict is to believe in them because they don't believe in themselves. So offering that kind of support can be so valuable.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and I agree with that.
Mm.
When I went off to treatment, my dad, this kind of a silly thing, but it really stuck with me. I was going off to treatment. I was 27 years old, had two little kids. I was a disaster.
Mhm.
And my dad said, "You can do this, Dawn. You've always had balls." Now, I mean, a little bit odd thing to say to your oldest daughter, but I still say to him now, this is probably totally, but I always say to him, "And thank you, Dad. I'm sure I got them from you." Because like, where else would I get them from? Is there a residential or outpatient treatment options for recovering from codependency? Do you want to, can you talk a little bit? Do you, like Hazel and Betty Ford, of course, is one of the, a renowned program, and they treat substance use disorder. Do they have a specific program that is for codependency? I know that they have family programs.
They do have family programs, but I honestly don't know, so I don't want to venture a guess, but I would say check with Hazelden. But I
Yeah.
think any kind of support group, that the focus is on helping you grow as an individual,
I
I think
think
would
that,
be helpful.
yeah, and I know this, I can say there certainly are residential and outpatient treatments for recovering from codependency. I know some others, and I will say,
Okay, I did not know that.
The Meadows in particular does a lot around these things. But what I will say about Hazel and Betty Ford, and I can't promise that they're still free, but during the pandemic, Hazelden has two incredible programs. One is a family program, so people who are family members of people who with substance use disorder, and the other is the children's program for children of parents who have substance use disorders. And these used to be delivered in person at various campuses that Hazelden Betty Ford has. And with the pandemic, they moved these programs online and made them free. So what we'll do, and we'll share this in She Recovers Together and on our public Facebook page, is we'll share links to the Hazelden programs, because I understand, I'm 75% certain they're still offering at least the children's program free. And it's an online virtual program now. They're online virtual programs. They may be getting back to in-person at some point soon or in the future, but they really do, they're remarkable programs. And I think especially, I think about all the parents who come into recovery and worry so deeply about the harm that they've done to their children through their addiction. And, the idea that there are these resources out there for your children.
Yes,
So Carrie, maybe we could look into a little bit of that, or Lisa, and share those things.
that'd be great.
Okay, let's see. Another question. My son is in a codependent relationship with someone who constantly needs to be rescued, and my son likes rescuing. The question is, how can a parent approach an adult child about the possibility that they are in a codependent relationship and limiting their future?
Whoa, that's a tough one. As a parent of adult children who have made choices I wasn't always happy with, it's so hard to just bite your tongue and not, want to jump in there and say, "Can't you see what's going on here?" I've never found that to be particularly helpful when I've tried to. I think that, he's in this situation now, and it's working for him for whatever reason, but I don't think that means that he's always going to be happy with it, or that the relationship dynamics can't change. So as a mother, I would think maybe the helpful thing to do would be just keep the communication lines open. Try to maintain as healthy a relationship as you can with him, so that he knows that you're there in a non-critical, non-judgmental way. And know that this may not be forever. You know, that most things in life are not there. You know, this is how it is right now. It may change.
I appreciate your response, because in my own experience and witnessing this exact type of situation in other people who I know and care about, when we kind of share our opinions of our adult children's relationships, it doesn't generally go well. Now, I love the way that you've suggested that she approach it. I'd be so much less subtle, and I'd be giving him some sort of a book somehow on codependence, quietly, and maybe not saying anything out loud, but interesting.
I think when someone's ready,
yeah, no,
they will find what they need. But I think it's important to keep that connection with you open, so you don't become the enemy.
Yeah. And I think we do become the enemy when we step into that arena, right? Often when it comes to other people, our grown children's or family members' love lives. It's hard, but I do. And we have compassion for you. So thank you for sharing that question. And thank you to one of our amazing coaches who's answered the questions that we asked about. So the children's program is back in person. The family program is still virtual. It's still free, and it's a one-day program. So we will share that on our platforms. Hazelden does not have a codependency program, but they do have retreats at the Dan Anderson Renewal Center in Center City, Minnesota. And actually, we're looking forward to figuring out whether some of our She Recovers coaches can deliver different programming at that renewal center. And also, Karen Foundation has breakthrough programs, Sierra Tucson, and as I said, I know Meadows has some great programs on love addiction and codependency. Do you have any advice on detaching with love? I don't want to abandon my loved one, but I know that caretaking them is not helpful for either of us. How do I let go in a loving way?
Detaching with love is something that I struggled with so much. I used to hear it every week. I went to a Nar-Anon meeting that I absolutely loved, and that almost inevitably came up. And to me, it felt like abandonment. Like, I'm not going to detach. I'm not going to detach from my daughter. So I think maybe just reframing it a little bit. It's not that you're detaching from your daughter. You're continuing to be attached to your daughter in as the mother, through your love, through your caring, your willingness to be supportive of any healthy thing that she wants to do. But you're not there to fix everything. That if a problem happens, let the consequences happen, because unfortunately, a lot of times that's the only way we humans learn, is through suffering the consequences. So let the consequences happen, and don't try to make it easy to continue this destructive behavior. So I would say your attachment is always going to be there, but it's more about allowing this person to face the consequences of their actions, and that gives them a chance to grow up.
Yeah, I get it. And I also get the impulse as a mother to be so afraid of what those consequences might be in today's world.
I mean, and there are limits. I mean, I did section my daughter. If you see that someone's on the verge of death, of course, you're not going to just say, well, fingers crossed. I mean, like I said, there's no black and white in this, and it's not like everything is carved in stone. We have to do what we feel is right. And I remember early on in dealing with her addiction, and hearing it's a disease. And I thought, well, as a disease, you're going to want to help every way you can. Any other disease, you're going to help. How can it be healthy to not help? if it's a disease. It was so confusing to me, but
It's so hard.
that's one of the challenges.
Yeah. I don't remember where I heard this or who said it or where it came from. But I love the idea of whoever said it. Somebody said to the person they loved who was deep in their addiction,
Mhm.
I will do everything and anything I can to support you in your recovery. I will not continue to support you in your addiction.
Mhm.
I thought that was really,
That's
really
that's
powerful,
that's
making that
that is the
distinction.
bottom line, right? If it's supporting recovery, then
Yeah.
yes.
I think we may just have one question left, and it's over here in the chat. How do you find relief from your obsession with the people you have dependence with? So maybe specifically asking about kind of mental. Oh, there's two more. So there's that question, and then there's another one. So yeah, that question, like what's the relief? Let's maybe just clarify. Maybe she's asking about the mental relief for the obsession.
Mhm.
I think I know what your answer is going to be.
Good, because I don't. No, I'm just kidding. Whisper it. No, my instinct is to say, accept that you have this obsession. That's part of a mindfulness practice, is to not judge it and say, oh, I've got to stop thinking about this. You know, how am I going to get this out of my head? But more, okay, I'm obsessed right now. This will pass, but at this moment, I'm totally obsessed. So I'll just go with it. I'm obsessed right now. And when it passes, I am going to turn my attention to something that gives me a positive feeling, whether it's listening to music, taking a walk, journaling, whatever it is. But instead of saying, oh, I shouldn't be thinking this, just accept that that's where you are at the moment and know that it will change.
See, I knew your answer was going to be mindfulness. I knew it. Okay, I do have two more questions. So maybe we'll just try and go through them a little bit quickly, but this one is, I'm being pulled into a codependent relationship between two family members. Oh, the wonderful triangle. Any
Oh.
advice on how to handle this dynamic? I've tried to detach with love and have set some boundaries, but it is difficult.
I'm a little bit confused about what this person's role in the codependent relationship is.
So there's two family members and they're being pulled into a codependent relationship between two. So I guess they're overly concerned, not about just one other person, but two people now. I think the answer must be fairly the same, whether you're dealing with one or two people that you're being codependent with, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, focusing on yourself, focusing on what gives you satisfaction, what is meaningful to you. I go back to the idea of values. Like, what is it that you value in life? Do you value, honesty, integrity, whatever it is that gives you a sense of being whole, being true to yourself? Focus on those things that have meaning to you and kind of let the codependent people do their own thing.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and the last question. Have you found writing to be a therapeutic tool for your recovery as well? What made you want to become a writer?
I've always loved to write. That's just something I enjoy doing. And yes, I think it's very therapeutic. And I think anyone, whether it's journaling, a lot of people love writing poetry, which I used to, and I don't so much anymore. But I think writing helps us really connect with what it is we're thinking and feeling. And I love when you write something and you realize, wow, I didn't even know I was thinking that, because writing can be a process of discovery. So yeah, I think writing is great.
That's a wonderful answer. And that would be those exact words is what I would say too. Beverly, I want to thank you so much. This has really been awesome. We appreciate your expertise. We'd love to have you back at some point to talk about mindfulness, another one of our favorite topics around here. So I want to thank you for your time and for your energy and for your expertise. And I want to thank everybody who makes this series possible behind the scenes and our foundation. And most importantly, thank you to all of our attendees for showing up today, for holding space, bringing forward your questions. We truly are stronger together. I'm excited to tell you about next Monday's Mental Health Monday. It will be Grief is Love with Marissa Renee Lee. And just a little bit about Marissa. She has a rather eye-popping resume. She's a Harvard grad, a Wall Street whiz kid, and a staffer in the Obama administration. She's worked on racial equity and small business affairs. And she's helped lead the My Brother's Keeper campaign for young men, boys of color. That's the story that her bio tells, but starting at age 13, she was also on a very different journey. She was one of the primary caregivers for her mother, who lived with multiple sclerosis for 12 years, breast cancer for 4 before passing away. She spent fully half of her life caring for her mom, and the waves of grief that followed from that experience have shaped her in indelible ways. So she wrote a book called Grief is Love that talks about more grief stories in her life, and we'll be really honored to have her here with us next week. Again, I'm excited. I will tell you that our next Hazelden author, so the next time that I'll be back here, I think the date is August the 1st, and I will be talking with Elizabeth Bishop, Hazelden author. She wrote a book called Conscious Service, 10 Ways to Reclaim Your Calling, Move Beyond Burnout, and Make a Difference Without Sacrificing Yourself. So, and we look forward to the next 3 Hazelden authors that we'll be hosting throughout the rest of this year. So thank you again, Beverly. Thank you, Chris, behind the scenes.
So
Chris
much.
from Hazelden has been behind the scenes. And to learn more about Mental Health Monday and all of our upcoming sessions, please visit www.sherecovers.org/mental-health-mondays. All of the information about upcoming sessions is there, and you can also access previous sessions, which are either on our Mental Health Mondays page, soon will be, and they do end up eventually on our YouTube channel as well. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. You made it very comfortable, and it was great. It was a great conversation.